Horse Week got underway in traditional style last Saturday. The animals dominated events in the area this week, amongst the activities of Polo Carnival, tours of horse studs and the Scone Cup Carnival. Last Saturday, however, all eyes were on the main street of Scone. Thousands turned out to watch the more than 60 floats and displays which made up the main parade. This year, Horse Week was a bicentennial activity and most of the floats had an appropriately colonial flavour. Participants included all types of historical transport, from sulkies to a line-up of veteran and vintage cars, as well as some modes of moving a little harder to define. The spotlight, however, was on horses. They came in every size, all dressed in their very best. Almost every aspect of the town's social and economic life was represented in the parade, as well as some characters of a not-so-everyday nature. But a more serious side of Horse Week is to be found here at the Scone Horse Sales. Each year, hundreds of breeders and trainers travel from all over Australia looking for a good buy amongst the locally raised horses. The sales are considered by many to be the most important in the state outside Sydney. While the city sales generally attract the well-known horses and hence top prices, Scone is seen as the place where unknowns can be bought which could later turn into champions. Scone is also the premier thoroughbred breeding location in the country, and the sales regularly attract national and international attention. This year was no exception. Several hundred buyers were at the ring for Monday's sale of yearlings and Wednesday's bidding on mares, weanlings, racehorses and untried stock. Despite an absence of big names, the yearling sale still grossed more than $465,000, up 30% on last year. The average price paid for the 180 horses was almost $4,000. Top price of $20,000 going to a New Zealand yearling half-iced. 250 horses went under the hammer on Wednesday. They grossed just over $307,000, an average of $1,239 each. Top price paid was $13,000 for a broodmare, Doring. The president of the Hunter Valley Blood Horse Breeders Association, Arthur Mitchell, says the reputation of the sales is growing.
The yearling sale on Monday, the average was up 30%. It's obviously a secondary sale to the major Sydney sales. The breeders here aim their better yearlings are sold in the big Sydney sales and sales in fact all over Australia now, but this has always been a good solid sale and very popular sale for buyers from Newcastle and the country areas.
This is the 41st year of the Scone horse sales and according to Mr Mitchell the area is improving with age.
We're certainly competing, Australia and worldwide, some of the best stallions in Australia in this area and will continue to be here. We're certainly not living on past laurels. They're some of the biggest investors are now aiming their operations in the Scone area, and a lot of money is being generated in Scone towards the breeding of thoroughbreds.
So what makes this area so ideal?
Well, a lot of people will say it's the grass, the climate, and basically it's just because this is where the major studs were set up originally, and it's obviously been a proven formula. A lot of very, very good horses have been bred here.
And so good breeding encourages good breeding and... For many, the field days are the highlight of the region's agricultural calendar. In the past, the days have been plagued by poor weather, but this year the weekend dawned to brilliant sunshine and organisers couldn't have been happier. An estimated 11,000 people took advantage of the clear skies to browse over the wide range of farm equipment. 50 commercial exhibitors were on site, displaying everything from pumps to heavy machinery. Organising Secretary Barry Bailey says the days provide an important facility for small area farmers.
There has been over the last 10 years a tremendous expansion in small farm operations, and a lot of those people really haven't had any previous experience in agriculture, and the objective of these field days is to provide them with that information that they need. There are very few other opportunities for them to get that information.
The field days were expanded this year to include 2 new features. The Good Food promotion, with its many hands-on experiences, proved very popular. Equally well attended was a display on farm health and safety. Many took the opportunity to have free blood and cholesterol checks, highlighting the importance to a farmer of keeping his body healthy. Despite the growing diversity of the displays, Barry Bailey says the emphasis will always remain on education.
We're very mindful of not losing our main objective, and that is making it an educational 3 days. We run lectures and demonstrations for small farm and new farmers in particular, and they run all day, every day. and those lectures are usually packed out. So we really are catering for the educational needs of the rural people there. But also the commercial exhibits are of particular interest to commercial farmers in the Hunter. So that keeps expanding every year too.
And the traditional handicrafts were present again to offer educational experiences of a slightly different nature. There was the chance to learn quilt making or be shown the finer points of constructing a house out of the good earth. Most popular of the displays amongst the young, however, was the new animal nursery. Here, if one couldn't actually talk to the animals, he could at least try to communicate.
Played in blustery conditions, the match really provided a great spectacle for the record crowd of 2,200 to a night fixture. A staggering 72 points were scored, with the Newcastle line being crossed 6 times and the star-studded invitation 15s 7 times. This was aided by a rule change which allowed the opposition to take a tap restart when the ball was kicked out on the full. Newcastle got off to a flying start, notching up 3 early tries through prop Danny Maiva, second rower Greg Milton, and another from the flying winger Matthew Onslow, giving the locals an 18-0 lead after 16 minutes. But then the experience and cunning of the visiting internationals Enrique Rodriguez and Nigel Holt helped set up many attacking moves, and these were capped off with some outstanding tries to winger Steve Arnold, who crossed twice, and at half-time only 2 points separated the teams. The second half also contained brilliant flowing rugby with tries to Evans, McClelland and Bailey, who grabbed 2 for the locals, and Vines with 2 and Holt 1 for the visitors, allowing Tuies to grab a 4-point win, 38-34. In the end, it really didn't matter who won, rugby was the winner.
At the end of each shift today at BHP's Stockton Borehole and Pacific Collieries and Coal and Allied's Stockrington and Wallsend Borehole pits, miners were solemnly greeted by management, handing over an ominous envelope.
Thank you. It's all right, mate.
You are hereby advised that your employment with this company will be terminated at the end of your ordinary shift on Friday the 17th of June 1988. Personally, I don't think the BHP are fair dinkum. I think it's a big joke. If they wanted to work things out, they could.
What are your chances of getting back into the industry?
Doesn't look good at the moment.
This is only the tip of the iceberg.
I've only got one thing to say, seniority doesn't pay for your house.
The next shift continued on down the drift, only to expect the same result at the end of their stint. They have 4 weeks more of work unless some compromise can be reached. BHP is holding firm, insisting on compliance with the Coal Industry Tribunal ruling.
So the unions were to accept the decision of the Coal Industry Tribunal, then we would proceed to renegotiate the purchase of West Wallsend No. 2 from Coal and Allied.
And return to that situation where you're offering a guarantee of no retrenchments?
Yes, indeed.
A spokesman for the Miners' Federation said today that comment will be saved until after further talks with the company on Tuesday and Wednesday. But the spokesman did say the union movement has a new card to play and is hopeful a solution to the apparent impasse can be found.
Goats are becoming an important part of Australia's rural economy. Some breeds have long been kept for their milk. However, it is their long-haired cousins who are now making a dramatic impact. Angora and Kashmir goats are shorn for their fine locks, a kilo of hair fetching up to $22. And the lure of the golden hair is growing. In the few years that Australia has been breeding goats, exports of their hair have risen to more than 500 tonnes. The Hunter region is now a significant contributor to that figure. In 12 years, the number of Angora breeders in the area has jumped to more than 140,
I guess
while
really got the
Kashmir
greatest
number
potential in
around
primary
40.
industry.
President of the regional branch of the Angora Mohair Breeders of Australasia, Colin O'Brien, says the Hunter has the chance to make its name as a stud location.
The potential for thousands of acres in the Hunter obviously isn't as great as, say, out west or in Western Australia. and there's a different emphasis, probably more on selective breeding and studs in the smaller areas, whereas the bigger areas are the commercial fibre production. But there's a place for all of them, I think.
And the quality from here?
As good as anywhere.
However, the industry is still in its infancy and growers admit they have much to learn. Seminars like today's are a part of the process. Almost 100 breeders were at Tocal to listen to advice from some of the best. This gathering follows a national conference on goat breeding in Sydney. The conferences are run every 2 years by the Australian Society of Animal Producers, bringing together some of the leading names in agriculture. One of these is goat breeding expert Bruce McGregor. He says their consumption of weeds and thistles make goats an ideal addition to almost any property.
We generally have a feeling that some goats on a big property could be advantageous, you know, because of these other benefits. And I don't think anyone's saying properties should go all goats. I think that goats can be integrated onto big properties in, you know, small numbers would be very useful for certain aspects.
Member for Newcastle, Alan Morris, announced the funding today at a meeting attended by members of the ethnic community and the inner city hostel group, which applied for the beds. They should be established on one or more sites yet to be determined. Land at Corlett Street, Cooks Hill is being considered, along with sites at Adamstown, Hamilton and the Carrington-Wickham area. 40 beds are planned for older people from non-English speaking backgrounds, with another 40 for the financially disadvantaged. It's hoped construction will begin by mid-1989, with the hostel running by 1991. Funds should be administered by a unique trust to include representatives of the ethnic communities, the inner city hostel group and the State Housing Department. It's the first such joint venture planned between the state and federal governments. But Mr Morris says it's rumoured the new state government doesn't want funds to go to the trust and wants to manage the project itself. As a result, he says the state government may not provide land for the project.
I just trust that the State Minister will disclaim that rumour and say that he will truly honour the agreements made by Mr Walker in the last government and as the communities understand it and the departmentals people understand it, and allow the project to proceed as a community managed project.
A spokesman for new Housing Minister Joe Shipp says there was no commitment from the previous government either, as the project was still being negotiated. He says the new minister will have to look at the issue before any decision is made. Mr Shipp is expected to visit Newcastle within the next few weeks.
This artist's impression of a 20 to 25-year-old woman was obtained from witnesses under hypnosis. They saw the woman operate a key card belonging to murder victim Riley Doring the day after he was savagely beaten to death. The identikit portrait went to air last night, and within an hour police had received more than a dozen calls from the public. By this evening that number had swelled.
The majority of people wanted to remain anonymous, and we don't mind that, but there is a great deal of following up to be done on the information received. But it was
the woman is of slim build with prominent freckles over her nose and cheeks. She has light brown to fair hair and a distinctive fringe with a ponytail. Anyone recognising her should call Mayfield Police on telephone number 60 1000.
it'll go. Walton
Lakes United
turns away
has
to
been a
Rowdy
dominant
McKinnon
force
now.
in
Rushed
local
away
league
from
for
the
many
town.
years.
Got away to the
Club
big
has
number
played in
4,
the last 4
Harrigan.
grand
Harrigan's
finals,
gone
winning the
home.
last 3.
As they're starting
They've
to run
shown
out
here
of
defeating
tackles.
Souths for
This
last
now's
year's
the kick through
premiership.
by Walters and
The team is
scores.
not performing
Thank
so
you very
well
much,
this
and that's
season,
wrapped up
now
the grand
lying in
final.
6th place. But
Three
President
bowlers
Phil
from
Anthony
Pine
says
Hole.
this is not behind the
Well,
reason the team wants out.
Some of the things that have been stated or said early with the formation of the Knights have come to fruition as such.
What sort of things are you referring specifically to?
Well, promotional wise, support that we expected from the Knights at this stage I don't believe has come through. We were told and led to believe that our competition wouldn't suffer in any way. Our figures so far on our home games, we've played 3-4 home games, and our figures are way down on what they were on last year's figures. Crowd figures, you know, our takings and such like. And we've been one of the fortunate clubs where our games haven't coincided with the Knights playing at home.
Quarterway line.
Lakes has given notice to the board of the Newcastle Rugby League that it wishes to play in the Central Coast competition next year. This would require a boundary change and approval of the New South Wales Country Rugby League. Secretary of the Country Rugby League, John O'Toole, says such a suggestion would not be looked at until the board meeting in September. President of the Newcastle Rugby League, Max Fox, says it is an extremely unlikely possibility.
Well, that involves a total boundary change. And that's got to go before the Country Rugby League, and I don't think the Country Rugby League would make it.
Mr Fox is also president of the Newcastle Knights. He admits the Knights have not fulfilled promises of their involvement with the local league, but says they are still working out their commitments.
Clubs and the directors of the Newcastle Rugby League and the General Committee didn't envisage the Knights training 4 nights a week, playing on a Sunday and perhaps training on Saturday morning as well. So physically the time factor has created problems. That wasn't envisaged. It was hoped we might have been over-optimistic in.
Professor Carl Wood is here to lecture at the university and examine research being conducted at Lingard Hospital's fertility clinic. Professor Wood shot to international fame almost 10 years ago when the team he headed produced Australia's first and the world's second test tube or in vitro fertilised baby. Since then, developments have raced ahead, the general public and government legislation struggling to keep pace.
I think initially it did go ahead too quickly. We made so many of the new advances in Australia, and particularly in Melbourne, developing freezing of embryos, the use of donor eggs for women to have babies who couldn't have ovaries, and also using drugs to produce a crop of eggs to improve the success rate.
IVF research has given many couples previously unable to have children another option. However, the development of the program depends on experimentation, and that is where this type of medicine becomes highly controversial. Governments around the world are still trying to decide when it is wrong to experiment with a fetus. Opponents of IVF say life begins when the sperm enters the egg, while others believe the limit should be up to 14 days later. Australian embryo research is concentrated in Victoria. After 2.5 years of discussion, the state government there recently brought down guidelines likely to affect the rest of Australia.
Up to 50%
These
of the
include a
sperm
1-year
is lost
compulsory
in
waiting period
the
for couples who
freezing
wish
and
to
thawing
participate in the
process,
program,
but
and the banning of
even worse
embryo
than that, up to
experimentation
50% of
22 hours
people who
after the sperm
approach
and
us-
egg are joined. Professor Wood claims the laws are too restrictive and strangling research.
The immediate impact has been to slow down the research. Our own group, which has been at the forefront of research in the infertility area, has in the last 2 years found it almost impossible to do any new and important work. Because we have not been able to...
Nelson Bay is no stranger to marine spectacles, but police believe the arrival of the First Fleet Re-enactment will draw similar crowds to those which lined Newcastle's foreshores earlier this month, and that could mean trouble.
Traffic-wise, it can be a big problem. There is only one road in and out of Nelson Bay, and that will get very congested, and parking around the town will be a problem.
So what about the police supervision? Have you got a fairly detailed plan drawn up to try and keep this whole show rolling?
Yes, we have. It'll be put into force as of tomorrow morning.
The fleet will remain in Nelson Bay on Friday night and open to the public on Saturday morning. Again, crowds are likely to be huge, with the added problem of shoppers and tourists competing for parking.
If people can park out of town, away from the main business district, that would help greatly.
Despite a strong police presence, the success of the day will depend on the drivers.
If people just take their time and drive safely, there won't be any problems.
The trials began yesterday at Lyle Peacock Oval, featuring 4 teams representing Northern, Southern, Western and Metropolitan regions. Northern region was dominated by Hunter players, with 9 of the 17 from our area. In their third and final game of the round-robin series this morning, Northern beat Western 30-10 to remain undefeated during the trials and be the top side in the carnival. 4 local players have been selected in the New South Wales team: Steve Story of Katara, Jason Martin of Raymond Terrace, Stephen Halen from Muswellbrook and Stephen Pringle of Merriweather. 2 Central Coast players in the Metropolitan team, David Fairley and Scott Duffy, were also selected. The state side will compete in the Australian Schoolboys Championships set down for Canberra starting late June.
The fake American mystic known as Carlos is the type of sham which Australian Skeptics works to disprove.
I am a very old spirit.
Carlos was in fact an elaborate hoax, partly organised by the body's American equivalent, designed to show how easily people can be deceived. The charade was highly successful and caused an uproar when it was revealed. Skeptics organisations operate in 30 countries. Despite being relatively unknown here, Australia has 600 members, to make it the largest outside the US.
I guess Australians are naturally sceptical, which is a good thing. It's a healthy way to look at life.
Barry Williams is the organisation's Australian president.
He's
in Newcastle for a lecture and to form a Newcastle branch. He says while it has its humorous side, exposing deceptions is also serious.
The one we like to talk about is the American Jim Jones, who started a sort of a faith-healing church and took his followers down to Guyana in South America and killed 900 of them.
Despite the skeptics' reservations about paranormal occurrences, Mr. Williams is quick to deny they attack religious organisations.
We get into some arguments with some religious bodies about testable claims. The basis of religions are untestable claims. They're not scientifically testable, and we don't have any views on that at all. I mean, our members have a wide variety of religious views.
Taken to do is to give the public the information as soon as it's available to us. But
it goes against.
The Labor Party to stop doing which is unknown to me, and I don't vote Labor. Broadly, I have. I don't normally vote Labor, but not unlawful, and also the parties.
According to Australian coach Adrian Hurley, the final selection process involved choosing 12 players who play best as a team. 7 of them, Ray Borner, Wayne Carroll, Brad Dalton, Andrew Gaze, Damien Keogh, Larry Sengstock and Phil Smythe all played in the '84 Olympics, while Sengstock and Smythe also played in the 1980 Moscow Games. It was a dejected Mike Johnson at tonight's Falcons training. Although averaging 31 points a game in the NBL, he had been overlooked and must be considered very unlucky not to be in the team.
It's not really the best day of my life so far. Very disappointing, actually.
What do you think of the side?
It's a little hard to say. It's probably a bit too soon for me to answer that because I'm not exactly in the best of moods to answer it, but there's some good players. There's some players that I consider fairly lucky. They should do all right.
Is this the end of your career on the international scene?
At this moment I would say yes. In a year or two it may be different, but the situation is now, I think, pretty much so. I'll just stick with the NBL now.
Win this match in
As
my
for
book,
Falcons
12
coach
points
Ken
to get
Cole,
the narrow
he
the
attacked
gap.
the Australian selectors, saying they can't seriously want to do well in Seoul with the 12 players they've selected.
Rather than pull out or hurt any individual's feelings, I just think that there's 3 or 4 players there that should be considered fairly fortunate to be there. I think they've retained the old guard and just shown a lack of courage in going with. Obviously, they feel a